Hello everybody, today I'm going to be reacting to a short snippet from an interview with Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn conducted by Owen Jones.
A year ago I wrote a piece for the New Statesman which said that if you become leader of the Labour Party then you will face a firestorm. You would, in terms of the media obviously, would demonise and attack you and twist things you say, and you would be undermined by the Parliamentary Labour Party. So I factored that in. I knew that was going to happen. It's been circulating widely, that article. But some would say the argument is you've got a very bad hand. But the question is, was that hand, that terrible hand, played properly? And the criticism is that the leadership has been often quite chaotic, hasn't communicated in a way that most people who aren't political understand.
Owen Jones has just mentioned that, according to him, some people have been criticising Jeremy because they believe that the way in which he is campaigning, the way in which his party is campaigning, does not make it easy for the common voter to understand what Labour stands for and what they're trying to bring to the table for the next election. Which is a bit confusing to me. I don't think Jeremy has ever been someone to say things in terms which aren't simple to understand. He's never been a politician which uses long words or tries to confuse people. But speaking of the common voter, as someone who fully supports Jeremy, I have to be honest, in some ways I don't think he's been clear enough about what Labour is going to be bringing to the table. Because as Jess Phillips, some people don't like her, some people do, but as the Labour MP Jess Phillips said, people do not trust Labour on the economy. And I think that is partly because Labour MPs, including Jeremy, are not doing enough to ensure that we can trust them on the economy. In this interview that I'm showing you guys now, Jeremy does very briefly mention investment, an economy in which we create a better economy for everyone by investing and not cutting services. Unfortunately, I don't think Jeremy has put enough emphasis on the investment part of that argument. People want to know that Labour, as well as making stuff better for the ordinary person, will hopefully cut the national debt. But there's not been much talk of that at all. And that's not necessarily because Labour can't cut the national debt. It seems to me that they just haven't been able to convince people that they can, because they've not bothered to try and convince people. It is my firm belief that you can fund public services, pay for people's benefits, and reduce the national debt by, well, effectively you're investing in people. Like Jeremy says, you're making an investment by not cutting services, and when you invest in people, they then have money to spend in the economy, which goes on taxes, which goes on VAT, and hopefully that can drive down the national debt. But what Jeremy doesn't do in this interview is, besides vaguely mentioning the word investment, he doesn't explain that we can cut the national debt whilst doing this. People have this very simplistic understanding of economics where they think that the only way in which we can cut the national debt is to make cuts to services and benefits. But I mean, George Osborne proved that that doesn't even necessarily always work, because the national debt has tripled. But what Jeremy needs to be doing is, he needs to be making sure people understand, people know that Labour can decrease the national debt.
I think there's been a systematic undermining by a lot of the, how should I put it, the House media around the House of Commons, the lobby, etc. has been that. We have had a number of quite considerable successes over the years. We overtook the Tories in the local government election on the 2015 vote. We won 4 parliamentary by-elections with increased majorities in 3 of those cases. and we've recruited 300,000 people to the Labour Party during that period.
Okay, so this is where things get confusing. Many people are saying that Jeremy Corbyn is not electable, and he's just mentioned that in by-elections, the Labour Party has actually managed to not only get a majority, but get an increased majority of votes, which seems to suggest something very different to what the mainstream media is trying to suggest to us, that Jeremy is not electable at all, which is a good thing. If you're a Labour supporter, it's nice to think that that's true, that the Labour Party is not only electable, but increasingly electable. That would be great to think, but I really do wonder, when I talk to various people that I know in my personal life, none of them have any trust in Jeremy, or much trust in Jeremy at all. Of course, some of these people are Tories, but others are actually people who usually sit on the fence, who aren't sure who they want to vote for, which confuses me, Maybe these are the people that the media says won't vote for Jeremy, but they will prefer Jeremy over Theresa. Who knows? One poll recently suggested that Theresa May is actually significantly more popular than Jeremy. So I really don't know who to trust. Though I've got to be honest, winning an increased majority in 3 parliamentary by-elections is a significant thing, because parliamentary by-elections count. That is people putting their money where their mouth is. And, if that's anything to go by, that's a good thing.
So it's not without considerable successes in many ways, and because the party worked together in both houses, throughout the parliamentary party and in the country, we managed to defeat the Tories on a number of things, crucially working tax credits and personal independence payments, and forced them to retreat on academisation of schools.
Funnily enough, Owen Smith, Jeremy Corbyn's rival, has tried to convince the media, as I've mentioned in previous videos, that Jeremy wasn't interested in fighting against getting rid of tax credits, working tax credits, and that he wasn't interested in defending the personal independence payment, and that he didn't even understand these issues. This is the guy that Jeremy Corbyn is up against, someone who actually has the nerve to try and convince people that the most genuine, sincere social democrat that this country has seen in many years doesn't even care about ordinary people that are struggling.
It's when that cooperation broke down, the Tories started to have a field day. So I say to colleagues in Parliament, think very carefully about this. We have defeated them on a lot of things, and we can continue to do that, and that will continue to do. Over media strategy, well, the analysis I've seen from the LSE is that 83% of all print media is either uninformative of my views or totally biased against me.
This is definitely true. I saw the front cover of the Daily Mail a few days ago, and they decided that the top story for the day was that Jeremy Corbyn's t-shirts that he was using to promote his campaign were created in sweatshops. That was the biggest story of the day. That was what the Daily Mail thought was most important for people to see on the front cover of their newspaper. As if Jeremy Corbyn would even necessarily know where the t-shirts were sourced. As if the leader of the Labour Party would be thinking about that kind of thing when he's trying to fight for his leadership and ultimately for the leadership of the country. I know what Jeremy Corbyn is like. I know that he cares about ordinary people. If Jeremy really was sure that these t-shirts were created in sweatshops, I'm sure he would have done something about it. And as Russell Brand once pointed out on his YouTube channel, when he was getting criticism for the same thing, he was selling t-shirts and it emerged that they were produced in sweatshops, he was saying, well, yeah, my t-shirts are produced in sweatshops, and as soon as I found out, I changed the source of the t-shirts so they were no longer being produced in sweatshops. But what about these newspapers who advertise unethical companies? I'm sure the Daily Mail has probably advertise clothing companies who get their clothes sourced from sweatshops or some other form of technology. It's probably been sourced from sweatshops. Are you telling me that the Daily Mail has never promoted the iPhone? Have you seen the working conditions of people who produce the iPhone? It's absolutely ridiculous. It's slinging mud at Jeremy. That's all it is.
And in some cases ludicrously so. Is it a cause of concern? Well, it's a cause of irritation that it's very hard to get a fair hearing in most of the media, but we have developed a very large social media following which does reach out predominantly but not exclusively to a younger audience.
At this point in the interview, I can't help but disagree with Jeremy here. He's trying to suggest that the newspapers who are rallying against him, making him sound like a ridiculous human being who could never run the country, who isn't even fit to run the Labour Party, and he's trying to suggest that even though it's annoying, he can deal with it, that the Labour Party can deal with it, when really I think it's one of the main enemies of the Labour Party right now. They really need to have an improved PR campaign to combat the mud which is being slung at Jeremy Corbyn, and it is mainly coming from the Telegraph, the Daily Mail. So the fact that he shrugs this off is maybe it's optimistic, maybe he has a better perspective than me, but I'm quite cynical. I think that the right-wing media really are harming Jeremy's campaign, and I think that the sooner Jeremy recognises that, the better.
And so, for example, we're getting over 1 million views of some of my parliamentary speeches on the budget, for example, things like that. So we are reaching out in a different way, and I do think the strategy up towards 2020 is obviously to reach out to Left Behind Britain, and I'll come to that in a moment, but it's also to continue to encourage and excite young people to register to vote and take part in the election.
I'll come on to social media and younger people. But I suppose...
Older people use social media as well, but not as much.
Well, come on to that. It's a very important point. One of the dangers, obviously, is if you're not defining yourself, your opponents will define you. And there's been no shortage of momentous occasions in the last few weeks. So we've had the vote to leave the European Union, Theresa May becoming Prime Minister, the most right-wing cabinet arguably we've had since World War II, the collapse of the long-term economic strategy of the government, or whatever they call it now, the abolition of the Department for Energy and Climate Change, soaring hate crimes. But some would argue, I mean, have you been out there, make it kind of intervening in a way that shapes the response? Some would say you've been missing in action. Like John McDonnell, for example, you often see him on television making the case. But with those sorts of big seismic moments in British political history, that there hasn't often been a clear response. What do you say to that?
Well, I've done my best to get out of the media where we can, but it does require an invitation to get there, of course, in the first place. You can't just walk into a studio.
You should try to knock on the door.
I could try that. That might be an idea. There's a plan here. There is a plan.
Squat.
But there's also been some fairly huge events, such as during the year the Syria vote, such as the Trident vote, such as the Chilcot report, which was a massive one. And I think we have defined a lot around that and defined a lot about the direction in which I hope our party will continue to go.
What people don't realise is that Jeremy Corbyn is all over the country a lot of the time. During the EU referendum vote, before people were able to vote, Jeremy was up and down the country, as Angela Eagle said. He was working as hard as she'd expect a 25-year-old to, and she didn't know how he managed to get the energy to do what he was doing. Funnily enough, she then turned back on those words and suggested that Jeremy was not working hard enough at all. And it seems to me that the media are pushing this same narrative, that Jeremy isn't out there. I mean, earlier in the interview, Jeremy was talking about the times in which his speeches in public have garnered millions of views, 1 million views. And he's doing these speeches because he is out there. He's out there all the time. You only have to follow social media to know that when Jeremy is speaking somewhere, like he was in York, like he was in Durham, like he's been in various different constituencies, thousands of people turn up to support him. And it's almost baffling that people are suggesting that he's not working hard enough. This is a man who I think cares more about ordinary people than anyone else I've seen enter Parliament in years.
We've also reached out in a way that other Labour leaders have not, in that I have resolutely been travelling the country, usually 3 days a week, on campaigning events all over the country in order to meet party members, union members. I've been to every union conference, I've been to a whole lot of other conferences such as Chamber of Commerce and a whole lot of people, and tried to reach out to people who have different concerns, environmental concerns, industrial development concerns, human rights concerns. And so I have done an awful lot of what I consider to be important alliance building with very important, informative and developing interest groups around the country.
The concerns that Jeremy's just mentioned here are concerns of the serious left, as I'm going to term them. Perhaps a group of individuals that I could count myself as being a part of. People who are very interested in world politics, in the environment, in stopping wars, things like that. And Jeremy, as he's just explained, has been trying to combat these issues which the left faces, human rights issues, things like that. But I wonder whether this would actually impress the average voter who isn't sure how they're going to vote in the next general election. Someone who wonders whether they're going to have more money in their pocket. Jeremy Corbyn says that he would like to raise the living wage, the minimum wage, to £10. But lots of people are cynical about those kinds of changes because they believe that if you raise the minimum wage to £10, then food is going to increase in price, everything's going to increase in price, and nothing will change, which is an economically illiterate way of looking at things, because it's just not that simple. If the minimum wage was raised, people would be spending more money. So, if the minimum wage was raised, right, and you wanted to go into your local supermarket, usually you would just buy a cheap meal, but since your wages have been raised, you can now buy something to go with it, a pudding, a bottle of wine, something like that. Trivial things, but stuff that people would perhaps actually do, just to treat themselves a little bit if they weren't just scared about not being able to pay their bills. And that would be more money for that supermarket. So they wouldn't want to raise their prices in order to compete with the higher working wage. They would much rather people were buying more things in their store, surely. I know some things would increase in price. For example, gas and electric may increase, but that's something that Jeremy's looking at as well. He's very interested in making sure that energy rates are affordable. And this is what I like so much about Jeremy. He thinks about things from multiple angles. What he doesn't do well is he hasn't conveyed to the average voter, the swing voters who aren't sure which way they're going to vote in the next election, he hasn't conveyed to them that this is going to work, that this plan will work out for everyone on an economic basis.
In terms of the policies you have at the moment, Ed Miliband, arguably, he had a set of policies which were not clearly defined at all. In fact, people would have struggled to work out exactly what those policies were. But in what way are the policies you offer different? So, for example, the British Public Investment Bank, that was in the last general election manifesto. Equal pay audits, that was in the last general, the last manifesto. For example, the fiscal rule, which is not borrowing for day-to-day spending, but borrowing to invest. That was argued. That was the same fiscal rule Ed Balls had.
But Ed Balls was offering cuts as well, and indeed during the general election campaign offered up cuts, and we were also using some appalling language on the DWP budget on welfare systems. A year ago, almost a year ago to this week, the party...
See, maybe that's the thing. Maybe I'm wrong. Jeremy and Owen there were just talking about borrowing to invest. Perhaps Jeremy has been up and down the country explaining this to people, but you never hear about it in the press. Borrowing to invest is not a statement which is on anybody's lips in UK politics at the moment, apart from in this interview. So if Jeremy really wants to get that message out, it needs to be on social media, which he says is one of the best platforms for him at the moment to speak. So I'm a big Jeremy Corbyn supporter. I just hope that in the next few years, if we don't have an early general election, Jeremy will be starting to convince people who aren't on his side that they really should be. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see things explained economically for your average voter, whatever your average voter means. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you'll give it a like if you enjoyed it, and also I love it if you would subscribe. Thank you very much, and goodbye.